Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war breaking news update. I could have done this last night, but it's a little bit late. So news has come out that Ukraine and the US have together signed a minerals deal. This kind of long-awaited, pretty controversial deal, where it has been controversial in its different iterations, has finally come to fruition. Let's look at some of the details of what appears to have happened. I say appears because there are some claims that there are three parts of the deal and the US wanted all three parts signed and sealed yesterday, but I'm not sure that's happened. It could well be just the first part. But anyway, negotiators from Ukraine and the US in Washington have reached an agreement on the main content of the mineral agreement, but are still working on technical issues in individual documents, and that's kind of what I'm talking about there. So they've signed a reconstruction investment fund. We're going to look at the Ukrainian understanding of what's gone on through their diplomats. What do we have? The US and Kiev have signed an agreement to share revenues from the future sale of Ukrainian minerals and rare earths, and that's really important. It's a future sale. Ukraine's Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal said on national television that the agreement, which must be ratified by Ukraine's parliament, was good, equal and beneficial. So that's good news. Ukraine would not be asked to pay back any debt for the billions of dollars in US weapons and other support since Russia invaded in February. I mean, that is massive. That concession, I mean, it sounds obvious that they shouldn't have to do that, but that was one of the big sticking points, and that was one of the more exploitative characteristics of the deal as put to the Ukrainians by the Americans. Ukraine's first deputy prime minister, that's who we're going to look at, her analysis, Yulia Sviridenko, was in Washington to sign the fund, gave further details, including confirming that Ukraine would retain full ownership of resources on our territory and in territorial waters. They belong to Ukraine. US Treasury Department Secretary Scott Bessent said that the historic deal, quote, signals clearly to Russia that the Trump administration is committed to a peace process centered on a free, sovereign and prosperous Ukraine over the long term. To be clear, no state or person who financed or supplied the Russian war machine will be allowed to benefit from the reconstruction. It was unclear up until the last moment whether the US and Ukraine would manage to sign the deal, but that appears to have happened. Okay, so let's look in more detail. It's first worth listening. I don't know if we're going to listen to her, but Tammy Bruce, who's the spokesperson for the State Department, said that she didn't have the details of the new minerals deal with Ukraine. But then in the next breath claimed that it's, of course, and it's not a surprise. It is, of course, and it's not a surprise because it's President Donald Trump. It is the perfect deal. I know no details about the deal. I know nothing about the deal. But it's the most perfect deal you've ever seen in the world ever, because it's come from Donald Trump, because I am so obsequious, so enthralled of my dear leader that I have to say it's the most perfect thing. Okay, let's go to Yulia Sviridenko, who says, on behalf of the government of Ukraine, I signed the agreement on the establishment of the United States Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. Together with the United States, we are creating the fund that will attract global investment into our country. Key provisions of the agreement in brief. So 1, full ownership and control remain with Ukraine. All resources on our territory and territorial waters belong to Ukraine. That's super important. It is the Ukrainian state that determines what and where to extract. Subsoil remains under Ukrainian ownership. This is clearly established in the agreement. 2, equal partnership. The fund is structured on a 50-50 basis. It will be jointly managed by Ukraine and the United States. Neither side will hold a dominant vote, a reflection of equal partnership between our two nations. 3, national assets are protected. The agreement does not alter privatization processes or the management of state-owned companies. They will remain Ukrainian companies such as Ukronafta and Energoatom will stay in state ownership. And again, this is important. Every single one of these points appears to show the negotiating prowess, the skill of the Ukrainians. They've done this with an American legal firm, by the way, but they have done an amazing job in clawing back all of the concessions that the Americans were originally wanting. I say originally, actually, they originally wanted that, and they wanted this to be worth $500 billion in the long term, so that the Ukrainians were paying back that. Then it came down to 350, then 100 billion in different iterations. Anyway, they agreed a much better deal, in principle. And then that was due to be signed by Zelensky and I think it passed through the Verkhovna Rada at the White House when there was that big argument. He got kicked out of the White House. Then the process started again. And now we've got this new iteration of the deal that appears to be really very good for Ukraine, at least as far as where they came from. I mean, you can still argue this is in some sense exploitative, but it's far, far fairer than it was previously. Okay, so the fourth point is there's no debt. And again, this is a main thing for me. It's like we aren't paying back $500 billion, some kind of number that Trump has plucked out of his posterior. This isn't paying for US aid to Ukraine. The agreement includes no provisions regarding any Ukrainian debt obligations to the United States. Its implementation allows both countries to expand their economic potential through equal cooperation and investment. The agreement complies with the Constitution and maintains Ukraine's European integration course. And this was really important because in one of the iterations, it was looking like if they were to sign this agreement, then they would be unable to accede to the EU because it broke some of the principles of the EU. I don't know the finer details, but in order to have fulfilled the obligations to the initial minerals agreement, they would invalidate some of the principles of being in the EU. It's consistent with national legislation, she says, and does not conflict with any of Ukraine's international obligations. Importantly, the agreement sends a signal to global partners that long-term cooperation with Ukraine over decades is not only possible, but reliable. And 6, the fund will be financed exclusively from new licenses. So again, in earlier iterations, this was going to be a case of not just new projects going forward, but existing projects. It's literally like the US was going to take control essentially of each and every kind of mineral project going on in Ukraine. Specifically, 50% of the revenues from new licenses in the field of critical materials, oil and gas, generated after the fund is created will be directed to it. Revenues from existing projects, or those already accounted for in the budget, will not be included. The agreement also outlines future strategic cooperation. All of these points are wins for Ukraine compared to where it was. 7, legislative changes will be limited and targeted. Only amendments to the budget code are required for the fund to operate. The agreement itself will be submitted to the Verkhovna Rada for ratification. 8, the United States will help attract additional investment and technology. The fund is supported by the US government through the DFC agency. This will assist us in attracting investments and technologies from the US, EU, and other international partners that support Ukraine's fight against the Russian aggressor. Technology transfer and development are a key part of the agreement because Ukraine needs not only capital but also innovation. And 9, the agreement provides tax guarantees. Fund revenues and contributions will not be taxed in either the United States or Ukraine, ensuring maximum effectiveness of the investment process. How will the fund work? The United States will contribute to the fund. In addition to direct financial contributions, it may also provide new assistance, for example, air defense systems for Ukraine. Ukraine will contribute 50% of state budget revenues from new rent on new licenses for new areas. Ukraine may also make additional contributions but beyond this baseline if it chooses. This is cooperation designed to last for decades. The fund will then invest in extraction projects for critical materials, oil and gas, as well as in related infrastructure and processing. Specific investment projects will be selected jointly by Ukraine and the US. Importantly, the fund may invest exclusively in Ukraine. We expect that for the first 10 years, fund profits and revenues will not be distributed, but instead reinvested into Ukraine, into new projects or reconstruction. These terms will be subject to further discussion, so there are technical details to iron out. We have shaped an agreement that provides mutually beneficial conditions for both countries, and the US affirms its commitment to long-term peace in the Ukraine and acknowledges Ukraine's contribution to global security, including its decision to give up nuclear weapons. It is an agreement that reaffirms the United States of America's commitment to Ukraine's security, recovery, and reconstruction. I thank everyone who contributed to this agreement and helped make it stronger. It is now a document capable of delivering success for both our countries, Ukraine and the United States of America. And again, it's worth going back to what Scott Bessent said, which is similar to a quote he made in a conference or some kind of event speech he made the other day, and I excerpted that for you. And he said, to be clear, no state or person who financed or supplied the Russian war machine will be allowed to benefit from the reconstruction of Ukraine. So that would assume that if they are going to bring in partners for this, it's not going to be anyone who's on the Russian side of things. And that's really good news as well. I mean, it sounds pretty obvious, but that's excellent. So just to emphasize those main points. So the headlines are: full ownership and control over resources remain with the Ukraine. 50-50 partnership structure. Ukrainian sovereignty guaranteed. State-owned companies will remain Ukrainian. No debt for Ukraine. Complies with Ukraine's EU integration plans. Funding from new licenses only. US will help attract additional investments and technologies. All fund income and contributions will be tax-free. And for the first 10 years, all profits will be reinvested in Ukraine. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a good sense of what is going on. Yes, an important detail. So this is your Liborero saying, instead of putting money into the fund, the US may provide military assistance, including much needed air defense systems. So I wonder if, instead of providing $50 billion of money into this, they can say, right, we're going to provide $50 billion worth of Patriot systems and interceptors, and that will equate to that kind of investment, and effectively Ukraine will have to put that $50 billion into the fund type thing, kind of like, or they would get 50% of the outcome of it because of that, that military assistance that's been given. So you're right, Ukraine have to give $50 billion. The US have to give $50 billion worth of equipment, Patriots and whatnot, and then that's your investment. So actually the money would only be 50 billion that's in there, but the US would get 50% of whatever outcomes. So as he says here, it's a clever way to link the two issues, but it's unclear at this stage if Trump will provide any weaponry. More on that in a second. Another detail, Ukraine says that profits from the projects will stay inside the country for the first 10 years rather than be redirected to the US. However, it then adds these terms will be discussed at a later stage, so things might change. Right, Tim White's analysis says there's a lot of criticism of the minerals deal, even more skepticism and a lot of confusion. So let me give my analysis and key points. First of all, Svyridenko, Ukraine Deputy PM, gave her full explanation after signing the deal, and we've looked at that. Perhaps the most important result of the agreement is that the US will now sell arms to Ukraine again, and I understand a $60 million weapons deal is set to be signed off by Trump as soon as this becomes law. Ukraine's MPs have to pass the law, likely today or tomorrow. Followers have seen, I've noticed, a big shift in US rhetoric towards Russia. It seems leaders of Ukraine, France, UK have done a good job in changing Trump's attitude and altering the terms, no repayment for previous arms, etc., and heavier sanctions are on the cards too. We come to that as well. That's it looks an even better agreement between senators on a bipartisan deal put forward by Lindsey Graham. Anyway, Tim White finishes, the deal is not perfect, it is exploitative, but Ukraine remains in control and has to share profits 50-50. That's assuming the minerals can be extracted at profit at all. Overall, I think it's the best Ukraine could hope for, achieved under immense pressure. So that's his analysis. Now, Timothy Milovanov said this, I think, before some of those details came out concerning the minerals agreement. Let's see when Svyridenko put that out. That's 10:44 last night. Yeah, so this was earlier. So he said the US wants Ukraine to sign all 3 mineral deals, not one, today or else. Yes, there are 3, but this is legally impossible. The courts will annul 2 out of 3 deals later, yet the US side insists. So I think they've only probably just done the 1. But he says deal 1 is government to government. This is what Ukraine's delegation is authorized to sign today. It wants to sign it. It's happy to sign it. The deal is good, fair. It is a win for Trump and a win for Ukraine. I know the details of the deal, but that's not the point here. He says, then there is the implementation. Deal 2 is an agreement between the USDFC and a Ukrainian agency to form a joint fund. That's a commercial deal. It can't be signed by the government of Ukraine. It can be signed only by the agency and only after the Ukrainian parliament ratifies Deal 1. This is constitution. It is different from the law in the US, but it's nonetheless law. It's a Ukrainian law. If it's violated, the deal is vulnerable to future legal attacks. Then there is a technical deal. That's the Deal 3. And that specifies by laws of the new joint investment fund. But the US wants a quick win and threatens to walk away if all 3 deals are not signed today. I hope that cool heads prevail. Well, it looks like that Deal 1 is what has been signed. But those technical details that we're being led to believe are Deal 2 and Deal 3 are still to be sorted out, and they will be contingent upon the Verkhovna Rada ratifying Deal 1, I presume. Okay, so that is that. Then we get this, which is connected. This is what Tim White was talking about. On Wednesday, the Trump administration informed Congress of its intention to greenlight the export of defense-related products to Ukraine through direct commercial sales, DCS, of $50 million or more, according to the Kiev Post. So says Max 24 there. 50 million isn't like massive, but that is obviously going to start oiling the cogs of the military-industrial complex in the US and start getting them back on board with helping Ukraine. So that's good news there. We'll have to see what that entails, what kind of equipment that would be. Right, now let's go and look at a few elements of peace negotiations in general. We're also going to do a little bit of a look at Steve Witkoff, because there's some highly critical analysis coming out of him at the moment. So Max24 posts this video of Trump talking about Putin and Ukraine.
He's a very smart guy. He's a very cunning person. But
Putin.
I've dealt with some really bad people. But I will tell you, as far as this is concerned, you have to understand, he had no intention, in my opinion, of settling this war. I think he wanted the whole thing. When I got elected, we spoke, and I think we're going to have a deal. I can't.
So remember, what Trump is going to be doing in any answer he ever gives for the rest of his life will be, 1, say how amazing I am, Donald Trump. So any answer is always about his own narcissism. I'm amazing. If it wasn't for me, X wouldn't have happened. Or blaming Biden. So you look at the economy, it's Biden's fault that there's a contraction in the GDP. It's Biden's fault that the stock market's going down. But when Biden was in charge and it was going up to record levels, that was all about me. Right, so there's a real kind of double standard there. But when you understand that everything is for Trump about how amazing Trump is, and he can't be held morally responsible for anything bad, then you understand, why he says what he says. But the other interesting point there is right at the beginning. He said, "I've dealt with some really bad people, but," and the implication there is that Putin is not a really bad person. It's simply what you get every time you listen to Donald Trump is the idea that, hey, Putin's all right, we get on really well. He's not about, I've dealt with some really bad people, and Putin's not that.
I can't guarantee that. A deal is a deal. Lots of crazy things happen in deals, right? But I think we're going to have a deal. If I didn't get elected, I believe he would have just continued to go through Ukraine, and over a period of time, a lot of people would have been killed, would have lasted for a period of time. And the reason that Ukraine, and I have great respect for the Ukraine as fighters, they have great fighters, but without our equipment, that war would have been over, like people said, in a very short period of time. And if you remember, I gave the javelins, and the javelins are the things that knocked out those tanks right at the beginning of the war. They said that Obama at the time gave sheets and Trump gave javelins. Well, I was the one that did that.
And of course, as I've explained plenty of times before, that's not strictly true. Right? He is completely mischaracterizing what happened. What happened is John McCain and others, but John McCain as a strong, really strong supporter of Ukraine in Congress, changed, really pressed to get lethal weapons to Ukraine instead of just training and non-lethal weapons that were predominantly the case under the Obama administration. So John McCain and Congress then pushed through this bill to get lethal weapons such as javelins to Ukraine. It wasn't Trump's idea. In fact, Trump didn't really want it to happen, because what happened then is the bill got passed through, it got signed by Trump, and that's it. Like, check me out, I've done this, I'm amazing. But actually, no, it was all the work of these people over here, and you just rubber stamped it. And after he rubber stamped it, he then said, and we're not going to give that to Zelensky until he gives us dirt on Biden, and that's why he got impeached. So he sings the praises of him giving javelins to Ukraine. I've done a whole video on this before, and I've given you all the receipts. I've looked at what happened in Congress, and I've looked at what was said at that time, way back when, and I showed you in that video very clearly that it was other people that got the javelins to Ukraine, not Trump, and Trump actually tried to stop those javelins going to Ukraine, and that's why he was impeached. But, in retrospect, he's able to sell this narrative that it was all down to him, that they got all of those amazing weapons and whatnot.
But I want to see it come to an end.
Will he have to make concessions, President Putin?
Yeah, he will. He's going to have to. And I believe that because we got elected, that war will come to an end.
So he clearly doesn't want to give the details of that. It's really good news that he said he will have to make concessions. That's the first time we've heard that as clearly as that. But notice his voice. It's all about the little things giving us windows to the bigger ideas here. So the way that he answers that question makes you understand that he doesn't really want to give concessions, and he might just be saying that because people expect him to say it.
Have to make concessions, President Putin?
Yeah, he will. He's going to have to. And I think...
Yeah, he will. He's going to have to. Anyway, we'll end the war. So, like, how meek he was in saying that, and then goes on to much stronger. We're gonna end the war.
I believe that because we got elected, that war will come to an end.
So, the strength of what he's saying there reflects that I'm all about ending this war. Are you going to give, is Putin going to make concessions? Yeah, probably will. Yeah, I think they will. He doesn't want Putin to make concessions, but at least he answered in the affirmative there. Now, then in just what I think is something of a car crash of an interview with Terry Moran, we have this.
That he's willing to stop the fighting. Don't forget.
You think he wants peace? You think Vladimir Putin wants peace?
I think he does, yes. I think he does. I think because
even with the raining missiles
I think he really, his dream was to take over the whole country. I think because of me, he's not going to do that.
Do you trust him? Do you trust him?
I don't trust you. I don't trust a lot of people. I don't trust you. Look at you. You come in all shooting for bear. You're so happy to do the interview.
I am
And
happy.
then you start hitting me with fake questions. You start telling me that a guy whose hand is covered with a tattoo doesn't have the tattoo.
all right.
I mean, you're being dishonest.
No, I'm not.
Let me
No,
just
I am
tell
not,
you,
sir.
I don't trust a lot of people. But I do think this. I think that let's say he respects me. And I believe because of me, he's not going to take over the whole. But his decision, his choice would be to take over all of Ukraine. Okay. It's a war.
So he thinks Putin wants peace. There you go. Now, Russia signals an openness to US involvement at the occupied Ukrainian nuclear power plant as part of a peace deal. So this is what the Euromaidan press is saying. This goes against, as it says here, just days before, Russian Foreign Minister categorically dismissed any transfer of control to over the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. So There's some confusion there as to what might happen with that power plant. We've also heard from Shoigu yet again, sort of reiterating these red lines that appear to be really problematic for any kind of conclusion to these peace negotiations, because Russia is saying this is absolutely what must happen, and Ukraine is saying that is absolutely what cannot happen, and both of them are intransigent. Ukraine has the right to be intransigent there because it's their country, and the US and Russia appear to want to give away Ukrainian territory to Russia to keep them happy. But Shoigu said, quote, Russian proposals for resolving the Ukrainian crisis are the withdrawal of Ukrainian armed forces from new Russian regions, Kyiv's refusal to apply for NATO membership, demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, ensuring the rights of Russian-speaking citizens. So again, like making your armed forces smaller, change of government, that's what denazification means, not allowed to join NATO, and getting your troops out of all of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Luhansk. And yeah, these are just red lines that Ukraine won't accept. But it's interesting, like, you've heard Marco Rubio saying, look, we're going to walk away from negotiations if both sides don't quickly come to some kind of agreement. And then Keith Kellogg, who has admittedly been sidelined, so you're kind of unsure as to how much clout he has with these words, says the US won't abandon peace talks. Ukraine agrees to a de facto territorial concessions. The US envoy Keith Kellogg said this on April the 30th. That he does not expect Washington to abandon peace efforts despite previous threats from the White House to do so. They're just all over the place with their messaging. Right, we're going to move to Steve Witkoff now, and Ben Shapiro has interviewed Zelensky recently, and he's been quite forthright in his statements about Zelensky, Ukraine, Russia, and this has been really useful because he's a huge voice in the right-wing ecosystem. MAGA America sees Ben Shapiro as a bit of an intellectual heavyweight. And so when he goes and gives a platform to Zelensky and says things that are broadly pro-Ukrainian, this is incredibly important and may have huge impact. This is what he says about Steve Witkoff.
Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov insisted on Monday that Russia will accept nothing less than total victory over Ukraine. After Steve Witkoff, the Trump special envoy, again, the idea that Steve Witkoff has any sort of special negotiating expertise, I want to see one iota of evidence that this is the case, because he seems to just travel around the world being taken in by various dictators, the Emir of Qatar, or being taken in by Vladimir Putin, with whom he said he was striking up a friendship.
And in case you think that I've got that on higher speed, that is how quickly Ben Shapiro speaks. You should try listen to him when it's on two times speed, as I listen to many people. Ben Shapiro's like... It's like Alvin the Chipmunk. Okay, so that's interesting. So he's got a really good handle on Steve Witkoff. Steve Witkoff just goes around the world getting taken in by dictators. And who is he? I would add, he's a golf playing buddy of Trump, who is a real estate mogul and billionaire, but he's no expert in international peace negotiations and deals with dictators, and he's getting eaten alive. He is getting eaten alive by these people, and in fact that's starting to be said more openly. So this is a New York Post article. A New York Post, remember, is a pro-Trump, it's a tabloid newspaper that is actually, interestingly, also being more pro-Ukraine than many other sources. It has a really interesting position at the moment. I wonder what the reason for that is. There's some kind of editorial situation there whereby they are fans of Ukraine and they have articles that support Ukraine. Anyway, this headline is "Bumbling effing idiot," quote, "Steve Witkoff shouldn't be leading Iran, Russia negotiations, allies and insiders say." I mean, quite incredible. Jimmy Russian quotes from him, "Nice guy, but a bumbling effing idiot," a Trump administration insider said of Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff. Quote, "He should not be doing this alone." Caitlin Dornbos says, Special Presidential Envoy Steve Witkoff, a former real estate attorney and investor with little diplomatic experience, has administrative insiders distressed by his approach to Iran and Russia, with one calling the 68-year-old a bumbling effing idiot. And indeed, here it is. Witkoff has become Trump's de facto personal ambassador to Russian President Vladimir Putin, in addition to taking on the Middle East portfolio, takes part in high-level meetings alone. So important. He's not taking experts from, whatever you call it, the Foreign Office, from the American embassies and whatnot. He's going in alone. And even worse, the translator is provided by the Russian embassy. Like the Russians provide a translator. This is so bad. Like, this is just the most naive of negotiating from Steve Witkoff. It is terrible. And he's said to have occasionally leaned on Kremlin translators in a break with long-standing diplomatic procedure, multiple sources told the Post. Ahead of Witkoff's most recent meeting with Putin last Friday, the New York native greeted the Kremlin tyrant like an old friend, with no sign of the usual coterie of advisors, experts and military officers who typically accompany US officials conducting negotiations. Putin himself did not attend Friday's meeting solo, but was instead accompanied by aide Yuri Ushakov and the head of Moscow's Sovereign Wealth Fund, Kirill Dmitriev. Quote, anybody engaging in these kinds of talks with Putin would benefit from having experienced Russian hands on his or her team and bringing them along to meetings with the Kremlin, John Hardy, director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracy's Russia program, said of Witkoff's move. A member of Trump's first administration was more succinct. Nice guy, but a bumbling effing idiot, this person said of Witkoff. He should not be doing this alone. Heralded by his allies as a fierce negotiator, Witkoff would appear to have plenty on his plate without getting involved in Europe's worst conflict since World War II. In his role as Middle East Special Envoy, Witkoff has tried to negotiate a ceasefire and hostage release deal between Israel and Hamas, as well as a revised agreement with Iran over its nuclear weapons program. I mean, gee whiz, what is this guy like? How is he qualified to be doing three of the most significant, important international negotiations in the last 70, 80 years? What the hell? Oh my goodness. Witkoff's tenure got off on the right foot after he helped broker a 2-month pause in fighting between Israel and Hamas that took effect the day before Trump was sworn in. But the envoy's attempt to extend the ceasefire went badly. On March the 12th, Witkoff left meetings with the Hamas representatives in Qatar, believing he had a deal in principle. The ceasefire would be extended by another month, with the terror group releasing 5 living hostages in exchange for a large number of Palestinian prisoners. 2 days later, Hamas countered it would release 1 living US hostage taken on the October the 7th, 2023 attack. Along with the bodies of 4 others, Witkoff turned down the offer out of hand, and the ceasefire collapsed 4 days later. I thought we had an acceptable deal, a befuddled-sounding Witkoff told Fox News Sunday on the 23rd of March. I even thought we had an approval from Hamas. Maybe that's me just getting duped. I thought we were there, and evidently we weren't. While many Israelis appreciate Witkoff's efforts, his lack of diplomatic experience is seen as clouding his judgment. So on and so forth, and that's to do with Hamas and Iran. But I have to say, with Ukraine, he is just deeply out of his depth. When Trump took office on January the 20th, he had already had a special envoy for the Russia-Ukraine war, retired Army Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, an advisor to then Vice President Mike Pence during Trump's first term. But in mid-March, Kellogg's job title was changed to Special Envoy for Ukraine from Special Envoy for Ukraine and Russia. Witkoff, meanwhile, was named an ambassador at large and given authority to negotiate an end to the Ukraine war with Moscow, but not Kyiv, which remained Kellogg's purview. Kellogg's work has been fruitful, getting Kyiv to sign on a proposed ceasefire and hammering out an expected to be inked mineral rights deal with the Trump administration. But having separate negotiators for each side is proving difficult to balance. So on and so forth. It's just, the most egregious example. So, making matters worse, Russian media has picked up on a pattern of Witkoff parroting Putin, with state television announcers recently commenting that the American easily accepts Moscow's narratives, even when Russians don't. The most egregious example came during a March 21st interview with Tucker Carlson, when Witkoff repeated Kremlin talking points that the largest issue in negotiations was political and related to Moscow's annexing of, quote, those so-called 4 regions, while forgetting the names of the eastern oblasts at stake, which were Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk and Zaporizhia. Quote, they're Russian-speaking, Witkoff said, repeating a common excuse Putin gives to justify his assault on Ukraine. Quote, there have been referendums where the overwhelming majority of the people have indicated that they want to be under Russian rule. But the envoy failed to acknowledge that Moscow either killed or drove out Ukrainian language speakers or ordered them to only communicate in Russian, which a post on other outlets has confirmed on the ground, and that the referenda were conducted under the watchful eye of armed Kremlin troops. Of course, those referenda have not been recognized internationally. The Russians, quote, the Russians are de facto in control of these territories, Witkoff said. The question is, will they be? Will the world acknowledge that those are Russian territories? Will Zelensky survive politically if he acknowledges this? This is a central issue in the conflict. Absolutely. Ukrainian officials rebuked those claims, with one telling the Post, "This is about sovereignty and dignity, not politics. I believe Mr. Witkoff has adopted the strategy of the Russian side," Zelensky told reporters on April the 17th. "Consciously or not, he is spreading Russian narratives. Either way, it does not help." Others have criticised Witkoff's habit of not knowing his interpreters in discussions with Putin. In a video from his Friday meeting, Witkoff is heard asking if the one person sitting on his side of the table was from the embassy. "It is impossible to have negotiations," quote, "when you do not trust the translator." Witkoff does not speak Russian. He cannot verify what is being translated, Ukrainian and Estonian translator and government advisor Yannicka Murillo said on X. Quote, "It is crucial that every nuance is translated correctly and in the context. No politician goes to negotiations to hostile environment, what Russia is supposed to be, without his own translator. You do if you really trust the other party, or unless you are not competent, unless you don't care. Beats me, but something is off." And then it goes on to talk about confusion around Iran and other issues with Witkoff. Just honestly, this is not good news for Ukraine, not good news for the United States, that they are relying on Steve Witkoff to be their negotiator in this war. As John Jackson says, Steve Witkoff is using Kremlin translators when he meets alone with Putin. This is egregiously stupid failure on his part. Just absolutely amazing. Now, the EU apparently has readied a plan B should Trump walk away from the Ukraine talks, according to the Financial Times. Kaja Kallas says Europe can maintain sanctions on Russia if Washington starts lifting its own sanctions. That's really good news. And I'm going to leave you with an improved senatorial scenario whereby Lindsey Graham, usually a really strong supporter of Ukraine, but he also bows his head to the dear ruler Donald Trump. So whenever Trump criticizes Zelensky, he jumps in to support Trump rather than, I guess, what he probably feels deep down. Like I've said before, there's a lot of compromat on Lindsey Graham, so he often has to flip-flop around the place and toe the party line. But he came out with a bipartisan proposed bill that he said had the backing of 60 senators. He's now saying it's got 72 senators backing it. So this is really good. And he calls it a bone-crushing sanctions set of sanctions on Russia, with 72 colleagues backing a bill to propose tariffs of up to 500% on nations buying Russian oil, gas and key products, according to Bloomberg. If he gets that through, I mean, that would be absolutely brilliant. It depends, I guess, on Mike Johnson, would it not, as a speaker who's been quite difficult in the lower house, in the House of Representatives, and not allowing certain motions to be put on the table. He's doing what he did for the 7 months of not allowing the Ukrainian aid bill to get through Congress. He's doing that with other things, stopping the Democrats being able to vote on certain things, so on and so forth. But so anything like this, you have to factor in what I presume what Mike Johnson is going to do. But anyway, here is a bit of good news. If that can pass, then the US is back on track with A, a minerals deal, B, selling weapons to Ukraine, and A, B, and C, potentially putting sanctions or having senatorial pressure on the executive to put sanctions on Russia. That's exactly what is needed. Anyway, that's an analysis of what's going on of the minerals deal. Hopefully that was useful for you. Let me know. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.